Step it up? Yeah. Okay. Welcome everyone. My name is Karen Redden. I'm the Mayor of the Town of Buller, and I'd like to welcome everyone to this Climate Emergency Action Plan and Active Amendment workshop. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge that we meet on our land, We acknowledge the Gunda people as the custodians of the Greater Adelaide region and that their cultural and heritage beliefs are still important to living Gunda people today. So this is a workshop, an informal gathering. This session will be used solely for the purpose of information sharing and not for the purpose of debating issues, building consensus positions or otherwise discharging council's deliberative and decision-making functions. There's no set agenda and no minutes that will be taken during this session. I'd ask everyone to limit background noise, and if you have mobile phones, please turn them to either silent or off. If you need to take the phone call, please take it outside. I'd like to, at this stage, to introduce Mark Stephen-Trick. Mark, did I say that last name? And Julian Marchant. So Mark over here and Julian over there from Edge Environment. Welcome, gentlemen, who will be leading this workshop this evening. And I also would like to welcome members from the Climate Emergency Management Plan, Action Plan Working Group, Catherine Warhurst, who's the chair, and Renee Chamberlain, who's also the chair of our Youth Advisory Committee and is on the working group as well. So you would have all received your packs, either online or hard copy. We didn't get the hard copy till Monday, unfortunately, but they were available online. These are draft documents. They're in the draft form. They'll be reviewed several times before being presented to council for final endorsement. This is the first time the council members have had a chance to have a proper look at these draft documents. You should have in your information pack the 4-page snapshot brochure, the draft C, which is the Climate Emergency Action Plan, an example of a single action brochure, which is the public lighting project, and an example of a communication brochure with proposed methodology for delivery. Has everyone got those? Everyone's nodding? Some of them do nothing. We've all got them? Yep.
We have
Okay.
Okay,
Good. So I'll leave it at that. I'll now hand over to Mark and Julian, who will take this workshop. Now, what time are we finishing? Is it 9 o'clock? 9 o'clock. Okay, so that's your time. Go on. No pressure. Yeah, we'll go through. I'll hand over to is it Mark? We're going to start. So over to you, Mark. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Mayor Redmond. Thank you for the introduction. So on behalf of Julie and myself, thanks very much for having us here this evening. As Mayor Redmond mentioned, we're from Edge Environment, so we're a sustainability services firm. We're both, Julie and I are both born and bred in Adelaide, but as a company, we work across the Asia Pacific region and also the Americas. But it's fantastic to be here tonight in Gaul with you to have this conversation. And obviously having a conversation around your Climate Emergency Action Plan, and I think it's worth just reflecting on where local government sector in South Australia is up to around responding to climate change. And now, arguably, councils in SA have been leaders for a couple of decades now. So we know in the early 2000s, there were a lot of awareness raising programs, international action. There was a mutual liability scheme, funding climate risk assessments going back to about 2008-9. And there were regional adaptation planning processes as well that happened in the sort of period around 2011 to 2015. However, as we all know, a couple of years ago, there was a much level, I suppose, heightened level of emergency recognised or heightened level of action required around climate change. That wasn't just recognised in SA or Australia, that was recognised at a global level. And we know the work that people like Julie and myself do that day by day, whether it's across government agencies, but whether it's with banks, insurers, mining companies, agricultural firms, climate change is something that many organisations are now really coming to grips with exactly what they need to do to respond. And a climate emergency plan is really a certain type of response, and within its message there is around the focus on emergency and perhaps more accelerated level of action, which is something we can explore tonight. If we break it down a little bit more, what's inside your climate emergency plan, and I know that you all have had a read through it, but really the heart of it, it's doing two things. One is it says, how do we look at reducing our emissions through time? That's the mitigation side. And the other part is adaptation, which is how do we respond to different future climate. And importantly, in a plan like this, a lot of the focus is also on that mitigation side. So how do you go about reducing your emissions? And when we talk about emissions reduction, it's accepted whether you're here in South Australia or whether you're working on this in North America or Europe. We always look at community emissions and also corporate emissions. So you'll see that's a feature of the plan you're looking at here. There's that breakdown between corporate and community. And that's a standard way of doing this type of planning exercise. And so also when we talk about carbon neutral, what we're talking about there is moving towards net zero greenhouse gas emissions. So it actually covers not just carbon dioxide, we're looking at a whole range of greenhouse gases. And the emergency part, I think one of the interesting discussions, and we'll touch on this again tonight, is what's really your level of ambition and what you're trying to achieve with your target. And ultimately that's up to you to decide. So there's lots of discussion happens on this amongst councils and elected member groups, but really that's something that falls to yourselves to work out what's the right fit for your council and for your community. So process we've designed tonight is we've got, after we've done this introductory part, we'll have some an opportunity for some feedback, and Julian will be basically working with me to collect the feedback. But Julian, I might hand over to you to just step us through the agenda, unpack a little bit more how we're structured tonight, and then give us a heads up about the questions we're asking.
Sure. So thanks, Mark. Just to frame tonight and how we plan to move through our discussion, we've got a really brief, very loose agenda looking, first of all, introductions, which we've done, moving into an overview of the process, and if you can excuse my handwriting, you can tell I've never been a school teacher, opportunities for feedback, and rounding out with a discussion and then a summary. So we've really framed the way that we want to capture feedback from all of you is via three key questions. So one is looking at the ambition of the plan. Is the plan ambitious enough? Is it over ambitious? Where do you think that lies? And are there elements of it that you think could be more ambitious or perhaps less? Other actions, so actions which are required that you think aren't included, or perhaps looking at actions which are included, there may be some questions about that. And then finally, looking at messaging for community, remembering that this plan is really for the community. It's about bringing them on board and taking them on a journey. And something that we really focused on working with Jack and Tim was about the messaging for community, because they're the people that we're going to bring on this journey with us. So is the messaging for community, do you think that's right? Is the language that is used within the document, is that suitable for community? And this fourth piece of paper is really to capture any other observations that you, and I'll be here recording those.
Thanks, Julian. And my understanding, so Tim, you're moving up with the microphone there. My understanding, we need to use microphones because it's helping with the live streaming on YouTube. So what we're going to do is when we go around seeking feedback from all the elected members, is we're going to hand the microphone from one person to another. Oh, you'll go through there? Okay, fantastic. Excellent. I'll hold on to that. Maybe Tim, we can leave the other one over there with Julian.
Yeah, I just have one thing to add.
Oh, yes,
okay.
Yeah.
Just when we're talking about ambition and the actions, if you go to page 43 in the Climate Emergency Action Plan, that's where the summary of actions is in Appendix 8, I think it is, or Section 8. So they're all there.
Great. Thanks, Tim. So this is going to be a pretty democratic process moving from here for about the next sort of 45 minutes. So what I'm going to do is allow for up to that 45 minutes for each elected member to provide some feedback. Thanks, Julian, for outlining the questions there. So we'll cover those around level of ambition, other actions you might want to see in the plan, what are the key messages, and then any other issues. And I'm going to have to pick on someone to kick us off, which gives everyone else a little bit of time to get thinking. But Cody, because you're opposite me, I'm going to go to you first. So can you kick us off and respond to those questions, or are there other issues you want to put on the table?
Yeah, well, I think this is, I think it's good. I think in terms of messaging for the community, I guess something I'd like to see is something more along the lines of a more direct call to action, or like a what you can do, or how we can help you, or how can your business participate kind of message that sort of gives, because at the moment these are good stats, but they are just stats. There's no next step. And so it would be good to start people off on their journey in some way by making it so that you do have, do have that more direct, like, what can you do kind of message to it.
And Cody, does that relate to any particular actions, or do you think that's across the board some more explicit advice as to what to do next?
I think, because I guess there's a few different parts of this, and obviously there's a big document, then we've got, the stuff, the brochure for the community, and then we've got like general marketing and other stuff that we can be doing, like something that we brought up before, ideas like infographics for Facebook, about that kind of thing, where you're like, so this investment council will save this much money over 20 years in, LED lighting, put that, this is an impact of, climate mitigation. How can you participate, URL, kind of thing. So like, I see it as sort of overall strategy. And for this document, I guess it would be good if we just had some ways that people could see this and then go somewhere or have a next step to look at.
Great, thanks Cody. And Tim and Jack, we'll throw to you at any time you want to come in with extra information. Tim, you wanted to add in something there?
Yeah, do I need to speak in the microphone?
I think you do because of the live streaming, yeah.
I guess we used an example of a one-pager, but we've got that feedback loud and clear that we need simple communication messages. And in addition to the public lighting one, there's also one which is specifically targeting the community. I haven't shared that with you today because we weren't trying to bombard you with all of the documents, but in that one-pager, it talks about the actions that will be taken to support community and the types of things they can do. So it's going to come through we try and make it come through as a supplemented message in every document, but there's also one specifically targeted about how we will be supporting community to reduce emissions and encouraging them to participate.
Can we have that circulated at some point?
So Tim, is it worth recapping you just in terms of how the information is presented? So there's a bigger plan, then there's a sort of short 4-page version of the plan, and almost an individual fact sheet that focus on the specific issues. Can you just expand on those different types of outputs?
Yeah, and it's certainly, there's one big plan which has everything, which is a climate emergency action plan that's got the detail in it for the people who would like to read the detail and ensure that the integrity is there, the background, the depth of knowledge is there. We also got the message loud and clear that people don't want to look all reading through a 48-page document. They want something simple that communicates what we're doing for the climate emergency action plan. So we thought about the 4-page summary. We've done one, we noticed that the City of Marion have done something very similar on about 6 pages, but something that breaks it down into a digestible form for most people to read. And then we also had the feedback that we could go punchier than that and just read, I think it was Nathan that brought it up. We need just 1 pages to communicate one issue really clearly. So we tried to prepare an example of what they would look like, where we could take 1 issue at a time or 1 communication message at a time and just focus on that so that people pick it up and have it.
That's great. Thanks, Tim. So really recapping in one of the messages here is a bit more explicit advice as to what to do next if you're in the community or with business.
Yeah, so basically, like, I think each of these documents or single pages can have their own focus. I just think it would be good if there was always a circle back around to here's what you can do next kind of thing, as just a default part of each of those.
Excellent. That's great. I'm confident we've got that captured. So thanks, Councillor Davies. Let's move along, Councillor Koch.
Yeah, thank you.
different people. Just as my background is adult education. So for me, it's all about community education. It's all about providing benefits, having a good communication strategy. The problem if you push too hard and you're too grim or hopeless, people push back, and that's a serious problem. I quite like the research done by Rebecca Huntley, what she's done across the years, where she's just talking about communicating the benefits to people. And you don't necessarily need to convince them about climate change per se, but if there is an outcome that you want and that they adopt it, that's it. That's fantastic. So I'm just concerned if you go too hard with the scare and the fear and guilt side of things, you're going to put people off and going to push back. But I think this document doesn't do that. I have read some others that do play on that guilt and fear, and I think that's a really big mistake. So I think
just to repeat that so we capture it correctly up here, so we're saying focus on the benefits, and almost a strength-based approach.
Yes, yes. I've read Rebecca Huntley's research.
I haven't read it.
Yeah. So she's sort of more looking at providing benefits. Not a lot of people sort of look at fear and guilt side of things. She's looking at the benefits. And I think that's where you need to go, because people actually push back when their where their self is being challenged. So that's very, very important. So yeah, but also I think you need to have some good examples of what people can behaviours people adopt. For example, people that have already adopted EVs, people that are using renewable energy, people that have reduced their consumption, for example. So in the document, we talk about having little tours in Gawler. So when you've got a peer-to-peer relationship, I think that's very powerful as well. So you need those good examples that you can actually see. For example, if somebody's driving an EV that fits normally into their life, and they charge it, etc.
And what are the particular, using EVs as an example, so posting on benefits around EVs, are there other particular messages you'd want to see structured in those cases?
Interestingly, I've got 2 EVs and I'm getting rid of my electric car. So, and I used to be the chair of AE in South Australia. So I'm right into electric vehicles.
Nominating yourself for a case study.
Yes, probably. Yeah, so I've been pushing electric vehicles in South Australia for a number of years. But yes, if people come and talk to me about EVs, I'm telling them exactly the cost, the running costs, how it fits into our lives, how it changed, how it improved, etc., etc. So those are good case studies that people can actually look at. But it's a peer-to-peer type arrangement.
So we captured there being a little bit more positive in case studies. Is there anything that relates either to other actions or the level of ambition around the plan?
No, I'm quite happy with the ambition at the moment. Yeah, I think it's fine. That's my main message is not to peddle fear and guilt, but to peddle benefits.
Okay.
Thank
you, Councillor Koch. Now I'm going to mix up our order here. And Councillor Fraser, you might have probably expected you voting last, but I'm going to come to you next, if that's all right.
Yes, I think we need to take the community on a journey. That's what we need to do. So we send out a newsletter every quarter with the rates. So in the news, as we push several things in that newsletter. So maybe we can have a way that they can save money by doing something, but also what the council is doing to save money. So if the council is saving money, that's affecting their rates. So I think that's the way that we can do it. So and it is a journey, as Councillor Koch said, it's not about forcing something down people's throats, it's about taking them on a journey.
I think what I like about what you're saying there as well is we can link that back to corporate community missions. So you think around the plan structure that's savings by council with benefits rates, corporate, and it's a good news story for the community that can get picked up there. What about those other questions there? Clearly, I'm glad we included the question around messaging because that's the winner tonight so far. What about ambition or any other actions?
I just said something, getting people onto bikes, we've got to educate people to get on bikes. Back in 2016, I went to Germany and I went to Munster, and they have a population of 300,000 people. They have 500,000 bikes there. And you go to the train station and they've got a garage that houses 300,000 bikes, which one. And in the town itself, people, pedestrians and bikes have got away with the cars. And a lot of them are just buying bicycles, you're not allowed to drive the car. I've explained before that getting out with the car and, you know, just getting out of your car, going to where you want to go. We need to educate. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take probably 10, 15 years probably. But we need to try and educate people if they use a push bike, you know, that they're helping the environment. But we can also get around because there's more people on a bike. But we also need more places for bikes. In Paula, if you ride a bike to the supermarket, there's nowhere to put your bike at the moment. So we need, that's something council needs to look at, is having more bike stands so that we can actually educate people on bikes.
Thanks for having that in there. So, Julian, I can see you captured another around education. I think it's also linked with active transport, and clearly within both community and corporate emissions, transport's a big theme. So there's lots of hooks there as well. Great. Thanks, Councillor Fraser. Councillor Shanks.
Probably going to be on the same line with the message for the community. The getting to zero public lighting fact sheet there is exactly what I talk about when I talk about key takeaway sheets. You pretty much captured that perfectly. I do note at the bottom there, you've also brought it back to the average rate pack, you know, LEDs saving money in your own household. Those sorts of messages and those sorts of takeaways are a very strong tool in directing people back to your next level of documentation. The 4-pager, the 6-pager, then the overarching. What I like about the plan as it sits is a lot of the topics, like you pointed out in the appendices, about all the actions are actually, you can just take them out and be a standalone document as well, and push them as a tick box as you work through them, because I do know that a lot of the actions are sort of 2021, 2022, when, you know, they are really in the next couple of years that we can really show that we are ticking the boxes here. So I think there is a level of engagement there we can come in on. Whether or not it is potentially ambitious given our budget restraints, that's something we should tease out, but yeah, look, I'm optimistic. Other actions, I mean, I'm not, to be honest, I didn't join the group because I'm an expert in this field. I completely joined it to try to educate myself in a very worrying item, and that's what I have been able to do. Now I'm trying to figure out how does that communicate back out. And I think we're on the right track. If someone came to me with another action, I'm more than happy to listen to it. But yeah, unfortunately, I probably can't contribute too much at that level. But yeah, I'm just liking where it's sitting at the moment, to be honest. So yeah, I don't know if I can give you much there.
That's good. So it's positive feedback, though. What we're saying is the way the messaging is being structured, and for example, this one-pager pretty much spot on, covering the type of issues. Ambition, you've got a bit of a question mark as to how to align with the budget, which is obviously really important. And I know Jack and Tim has been quite a lot of work going and thinking through the budget side of this. And then on the other actions, it sounds like it's pretty much on the market as well. Great. Tim or Jack, do you want to comment on the budgetary side or the costing side of this and where that factors in?
Thanks, Mark. Look, I think the budgetary side of things is that we are in the point where the budget is up to the end of the shortly, and then the process commences from there. We've been through a few iterations where we've looked at, you know, some aspirational types of targets and goals and ambitious projects. And again, you know, it's one line above line through that process, and then hopefully in the next about 4 weeks we'll have a slightly better understanding of where we're sitting with that. But so far, we were in council just recently on the wind project, and which was a fantastic outcome in relation to that. Not implementing, I think the numbers just add up. So I think it's just watch this space and we'll just go through the emotion through the council.
Thanks, Jack. It looks like Tim wants to add something in here.
I just add that a lot of work goes into working out is the project feasible, plausible, can it be achieved, and we are doing a lot of that background work, and some of it will involve feasibility studies, and it might be several years before that work is complete and we commence. I notice that City Marion's got dollars and cents next to some of their ambitious projects, which are out quite a few years and all the work hasn't been done. So we're all basing that. We're doing what has to be done for the annual financial year, and also what has to be done in terms of putting up actions that we think are plausible now, but we don't have all the answers, but we still think that they should be in there to increase our aspirations. There was just one more thing about that, and I think just getting that future approach, looking at the budget and how it's going to save us money in the long run is really important. That's where we sort of look at how the dollars and cents add up. So that's got to be our story. We're looking at the costs, the benefits, and the long-term plan.
Great, thanks, Tim. And that links back in Councillor Fraser with your comment earlier on as well around what some of the cost savings might be. Deputy Mayor, would you like to go next?
Yes, thank you very much. Yes. I thought it all very, very interesting, and I think that as a couple have already said, it's a matter of getting the community to come on board with this. And I think one of the most exciting things that I've seen where I believe the community's taken on and said, well, they are doing something is the item 3 on page 45, where we're actually using recycled material using our roadways. I think by showing that to the community, we're going to get them on board, and I think it comes across it. The last thing that we want to do is ram this down the community's face, because all they're going to say is, well, okay, if we do that, then we're going to have to pay more rates or whatever. I also, the point of changing that to electric vehicles, providing we've got a charge point that we can generate our own power. I think that's probably the most important part of it. So yeah, I see a lot of merit in it, and I think, as you mentioned before about Councillor Champ's one page there, that's the way I think we should go. We should move now, move slowly. I believe we've come a long way with Tim on board and Jack, that we are moving forward and the community is coming on board. And if they're not on board, it's not going to work.
But, reinforcing the importance of community messaging there, but also highlighting that for EVs, and Councillor Kosh mentioned EVs. And I think that's an interesting topic. In South Australia, we've had the SA government's committed to all of the SA government fleet being electric by 2030, and also all new car sales, I think, in SA by 2035 are electric. So I think, even the space in which you've been doing some of the drafting work on this, you've had major policy announcements happening by state government. What we've got GM, I think, saying all their cars are by 2035 going to be electric vehicles, and Jaguar's doing it by 2024. So it's an example where there's lots of new information being added in, which sort of further bolster out and reinforce what you're doing.
I think also the point about the community being on board. I mean, as we travel around the country, whether it's just outside of Parliament or it's just outside of Palmer, a little town in the middle of nowhere, a pump about anything there. And you see acres and acres of solar panels, but there's really nothing being said about it. And everybody says, well, what's that there? What's the solar panel? Is it owned by the Victorians that make the money out of it, or who is it? What is it that's South Australia? And I think the community's got to be kept on board if they're going to get behind the projects that local government councils want to support.
So you're flagging there might be an opportunity to get recognition. There are actually a lot of things happening that people may not always understand or recognise yet.
Well, now it's another new one. Introduced up around Auburn. It's going to be one of the biggest. And also World Team up now from Murray. It's going to be one of the biggest wind farms ever built. But if it was South Australia, would have been built in our state, for another state or whatever. I think we keep the community in on the whole thing. Well, they're going to be happy, and we're going to find it easier to introduce into our local.
So it's a big change that's happened. Jack, looks like you want to come in here.
I just want to add that with our existing charging stations that we have at the having said that the LIC are actually now leaving, so the companies left Australia, so that infrastructure is aging, it's going on. Actually, recently has last week. Significant frustration of interest for 6 charging stations during all work to replace the 3 that will be done shortly. So we're on the front foot with this with the minister's department. So hopefully we'll be with a good opportunity. And I'm talking about hopefully a grant to support those as well.
So I might just jump in and just, if we can focus on it, I know it's really interesting what you guys are saying, but I really want to hear what you're saying. I feel that we won't get a chance to speak. So I just thought I'd say that I saw Councillor Tilly looking at his clock, and I think that's a signal to say let's see what we're going to do.
Just so everyone knows the process, we're allowed about 5 minutes for everyone to speak, each of the elected members, and I'm keeping a close eye on the clock, and we're absolutely sticking to it at the moment, so we're definitely on track for time, and that includes some additional allowance of time at the end for general discussion. So, having said that, let's move on. Councillor Berlongo, what are your views on messaging or other actions or ambition? You're okay? Okay. You've just taken us 5 minutes. We'll share that equally elsewhere around the room. Councillor Hughes.
Yeah, I've agreed with about everyone's comments so far, which has been really, I think, helpful as well. On page 7 of the draft environmental plan, it does mention the interactions with all the existing policies and plans, and I think it's really important that there's some kind of emergency action plan is strongly linked to those plans, and we get that interaction and that reporting, whether it's in our long-term financial plan or in the other plans and emergency management plan that we've already got. And each year we have an annual report. That reporting and that interaction with all our existing, our most important plan is our community plan, and just making sure that we've got those really strong linkages with all those documents. I think as a council, we've been making sure that has been happening with the process, but I just think it's might need some more detail there on how that's going to work and just sort of how it's all going to be kept accountable and recorded, and so it's seen as a proper working document as well. I like the one-page sheets as well. I think that's really good. I do think that it's mentioned there the water urban design principles and having those projects and a bit like what Councillor Kosh was saying about having those projects and people seeing them and talking about them, having your local champions in your community, I think is really important to sort of promote some of that work. And I don't see much in the plan about sustainable water sensitive gardens or looking at drought hardy natives or local indigenous species and those sorts of things at all at the moment, which I think would be good to have something in the plan, even if it's just really strong references back to our biodiversity management plan or our environmental management plans and other plans where they're delayed. But that whole water sensitive urban garden sort of work was done 5 or 6 years ago, and there's a huge amount of work that's been done in that area by the garden nursery industry as well. They were the champions of that work, the nursery. So I think that's important. That's something practical that a lot of people in Florida have a lot of pride in their gardens, and it's an area that's quite handy and helps that whole heat side of things as well, which is important. But yeah, I think overall they've been really happy with what all the other councils have been saying as well, which has been really positive.
Thank you. So the 2 key messages come out for me there. One is site strengthening around what we call an adaptation measures to how you respond to future climate. Picks up on water sensitive design and also selecting the right plant for a hot, dry future. The other point you mentioned at the start that goes around key corporate governance documents. So the process happened with councils in Adelaide this week, actually, a number involved in looking at has climate change embedded in their key corporate governance documents. As you say, everything from community plan, strategic plan, long-term financial plan, and also the asset management plans. It's a really important consideration. Well, I know that it is flagged there as well in the current long version of the action plan. So thanks for both of those. We'll capture those both under the any other actions. Excellent. Thanks, Councillor Hughes. Councillor Tully.
Thank you. Just to introduce myself, 40 years in education, 20 as principal, and in my schools, one of the initial leaders of the transition to sustainable education. Since retiring, I've stepped at my work with Al Gore, Climate Reality. I'm now one of his mentors, leaders in South Australia, trained him 4 times. And also I was on the group that set up Climate Action Australia, which came out of the Climate Summit in last year. So that's some of my background. I'm heavily into this area. And I totally agree with some of the statements made here tonight. This notion that we can't declare an emergency is just an absolute nonsense. We are the beneficiaries in the state of declaring emergencies. When we hit code red, as a principal of Burwood High School, I knew exactly what to do. My buses did not run. Nobody panicked. Because an emergency declaration means you have an action plan. The moment the World Health Organization said pandemic, the worst declaration you can get, we did not panic. In South Australia, we do not panic. All of our fire and emergency services people will tell you the safety in having a declaration of emergency. So to declare an emergency is not to create fear. To declare an emergency is to put in place an action that keeps people safe. Firstly. Second, we are beyond tinkering at the edges. We are beyond saying to our community, could you please recycle a bit more? Could you please save a bit more water? Could you please go green? We are well beyond that. We don't have time to. That stuff is good. Driving electric vehicles is good. Recycling is good. But we do not have time to say, please will you come on some journey. We have to be confronting government and we have to be confronting people. Because there is that much CO2 at 427 parts per million in the atmosphere now, it will take us to 1.5 degrees. And if we're listening to the World Health Organization, if we're listening to the Australian Medical Association, if we're listening to all of the emergency services heads, if we're listening to the bureaus of meteorology around the world, they are saying, if you're listening to the climate report, we cannot go past 1.5 degrees. And yet there's enough in the system to take us there now. What you've just seen in America from the massive cyclones that hit them through their summer to now the massive polar vortex which is smashing them is what's coming again and again and again. They are paying trillions of dollars to pick up the pieces, and now the snow is melting. They are in massive flooding through Texas. I have family that live in Texas and Louisiana. I watch this stuff. It's irrefutable that it's caused by the warming climate. And us tinkering around the edges, and some of us like here tonight, oh, we've got to go gently with the community, we've got to take them with us, is absolute nonsense. We will die if that's what we do. We're dying now. And if you think we can't do it, have a look what happened with COVID. There is a perfect example. The salvation of the COVID was the development of a vaccine. It normally takes 5 to 8 years to go through the efficacy to develop a safe vaccine. They've done it in under 12 months. Why? Because they saw an absolute need and they threw billions at it. And they've now got 3 that are looking pretty good. There's hope because of that. The world got together and threw money at it. And if you understand modern monetary theory, they printed money to keep the economies going and to throw money at those without pushing, at that research, without pushing inflation. We should have learned back in 1989 that we could do it, because in 1989, we banned worldwide chlorofluorocarbons and similar products that were killing the ozone. Because the world got together and said, you know what? If we don't do this and we kill the ozone layer, we will kill ourselves. So in Germany, that compact in 1989 made worldwide changes. Now, what's missing from this document? There's some lovely motherhood statements, there's some lovely chink around the edges, but there's nothing serious. And to talk of 2050 is just we don't have the time for that. But the answer lies with this type of action at councils and at government and at local government. The big bit that's missing in this is our pressure on policymakers. We have to be putting pressure continually, which is why we declared climate emergency action.
Councillor Tully, this is great. I'm going to link back to here. So what I'm hearing for you is the ambition side. It's one of the areas that you've got concerns about. That is, in terms of the way we're framing ambition here, the extent of acceleration in reducing greenhouse gas emissions, that's an area that you're particularly focused on. Is that right?
I don't know if you've been listening.
I have been listening, and I understand exactly what you're saying. And 2030 with City of Marion, there are plenty of examples of local governments elsewhere who have shorter timeframes. Catherine, and then
I actually have finished.
okay. Look, can we let Ian? I'll let Ian finish, so I'll give everyone else 5 minutes. Yeah. No, it hasn't been 5 minutes. Okay. That's fine, and then we'll come back, but I do want to give everyone the same amount of time to speak.
I'll be really quick. In the 2050 dates that came in on these graphic designs is incorrect. It's actually 2030. So the 2030 dates are in the main document. For some reason, the 2050 date was substituted in the graphic design. So yeah, I agree with the urgency issue and the 2030 date, and no, that's what's actually in the content of the main document.
Thanks for the clarification.
So it's a shame we just lost Ian, because the reason we actually put ambition up with the first question was to flush this out, and that was the reason for putting it up there. So I think what I'd like to do is actually come back to that, because it is an important point. We're going to debrief this all. Mayor Redmond, you haven't had a chance yet to make a contribution, but all other elected members have. Would you like to share your thoughts on either of those questions or other issues?
Yeah, thank you. I like the document. I think it's got some good balance. I think from an ambition point of view, the only question I have is around electric vehicles, and is, are we going to be able to achieve 400% light vehicle by 2025? I noticed there's a trial as part of the actions for 2022, which is next year. I'm not quite sure what that looks like. So that will put a lot of pressure. We have to completely replace, and our vehicles weren't ready for turnover. If they're ready for turnover, you go and get an electric vehicle. That makes complete sense to me. But how quickly is that turnover? So that's a key question for me, and how it relates to the budget. I think that, but I certainly support that transition to electric vehicles. I think that's a no-brainer. From a heavy vehicle, a bit like Nathan, I'm not an expert in this area, but I haven't seen much in the way of replacing, and we certainly need to replace diesel. That's a no-brainer too, but what's that looking like in, and I know General Motors has said by 2030, their entire manufacturing will be electric, so I assume that diesel will be paid for. But will that happen by 2030, or is that too ambitious? So that's a question for me. Is that an achievable? Because I want stuff to be achievable. I want it to be aspirational. We need to, if we're going to put this out, we need to be able to deliver on it as far as I'm concerned. From a council's organisation point of view, I think it's fantastic that we're focusing on the community, but I don't think there's enough awareness raising for, and I know you two guys are doing fabulous work within the organisation, but do we need to actually strengthen around the awareness raising around staff and how staff can be our champions as well, not just our community, but can be leaders in their own right of how we manage, how we are outward-looking as it relates to the climate emergency and zero emissions and understanding what that term means. So what David Hughes picked up around the corporate and the strategic documents, I think is critical. So not reinventing the wheel, particularly around biodiversity. So the biodiversity plan uses those answers around Indigenous plants, so we can cross-reference really easily. We can paraphrase from other reports, so that when you can actually, if it's an electronic report, you have that highlighted stuff and you can go straight to that section of the particular report. We're able to do that. Yeah, hyperlink would be really, really good. So then with our community plan, we've certainly embedded climate change. So again, throwing that into the key themes of the community plan so that it all links, because every report that comes to council refers to elements of that community plan. So I think that's also a really important point, and how they interface. What else? I think that I love the one-page documents. I think agree with what was said around making the language really easy to understand. What is our key message? I think that will break sometimes. And for some people, that will be perfect. You know, people who really want lots of detail. And I love the graphs. I love the focus around. And I think all people want to see cost effectiveness. They want to improve their climate mitigation and adaptation, but they also want to couple it with cost effectiveness. And so I think you've nailed that. You've understood that. So again, making that language really, really simple. I think from a council organisational point of view, just that awareness and education for staff, because they're our leaders and our champions as well. Yeah.
That's a really important point. I don't think we've covered yet, is ensuring that council staff can be champions. I think coming into the early part of the discussion, won't recap too much more on the EV side, but I know what we were at Campbelltown yesterday, having the exact same discussion around what's the point where you get price parity between fuel injected vehicles versus EVs. I think I know East West, I think has got one of the garbage trucks, so every truck is, they've got an electric one. They turn over every 7 to 8 years, so they're at a point where they're saying they're starting to look at longer term planning.
And I think Ian's point around advocacy is a really important one. So it is in there. I think it doesn't jump off the page. So where does leadership fit in? So a section on what does leadership and climate change look like, and we look for opportunities. So we're doing that at the OGM. We hopefully will do that at the national conference. But what are the other opportunities? You know, what are the other advocacy opportunities that we might be able to engage in?
So Julian, I think that's one under any other actions. Oh, sorry, I can see. Yes, any other actions that we can add in advocacy leadership in there as well. Yeah. Excellent. So we've got all around the room. Unfortunately, it has left us, so we'll sort of note his comments. I know Julian, you were capturing it there. What we'll do now is ask Julian to do a recap of what some of the key messages are that have come out. So as you can see, he's been feverishly writing away notes. So yeah, can you recap for us what's coming? Obviously the messages for the community was particularly strong at the start, but then we have started to fill out some of the other sheets.
Yeah, so I think some of the key themes that have come out is really looking at how messaging is how we message to the community. So we've kind of noted that there's a strong theme about taking community on a journey and focusing on the benefits of action. So being really positive on the front foot with the community. There's some thoughts around having key takeaway messages, which I think links in with the general theme of trying to communicate the benefits. People tend to like the messaging, they like pictures of the one page in the short form, and the longer form, there's a lot more detail for those that need it. Looking at from an ambition side of things, I think it was, Nathan, you noted that there was good use of short-term targets, and that's supported by someone else. Does the ambition align with the budget? So I believe that Jack and Tim discussed a little bit around the importance and research that goes into ensuring that targets aren't just made without having the financial clarity to back that up, and that there's always a need to look at the technical and financial feasibility of these targets. People tend to like the plan, so there's a lot of merit in it, and they noted that it is strongly aligned, or it needs to be strongly aligned to other council plans, so ensuring that the action plan links to the biodiversity plan, the asset management plan, and the broader governance issue of ensuring that climate change isn't something that sits outside, but it links with all other areas of council and all other policies within council. From any other actions, we've noted that there's a strong focus on education. That's something both internally within council, but also to the community. And that's something that we focused on a lot, I think, with comments for the draft plan. There were some comments around active transport and bicycle infrastructure, the need to perhaps encourage people through creating these active transport networks that are attractive and encourage people to ride. And then we had a discussion around electric vehicles and the need to have the infrastructure in place to support the rollout of EVs within the city. And that's something that I think lots of councils are grappling with as well as nationally and from a state perspective.
Right, are there any Julian things are there any other issues, just as you've been listening to this repeat here, do you think we've missed or that weren't captured earlier on?
Just a question around the transition to fully electric vehicles. I've got some queries around whether that's achievable in the 225 for light vehicle, and then fully electric, so by 230, I think. Is that right?
Henry, did you want to come
Yeah, if I could. When I first read this report leading up to, coming to tonight, some of the vicious elements jumped out of page, but I didn't want to stymie the documentation being processed. I didn't want to put my sort of flavour on it, and that certainly has jumped out at me as being something that we look at. And I'm glad to hear from the members that we don't want something that's so aspirational that the tangibility of it is lost. We want something that is real, and there are a couple of areas that need to be reviewed in terms of their our capacity to deliver. That transitioning of the fleet to electric is certainly one that we can break down a bit more. I'm not interested to say that we can achieve that. If anything, I've got reservations about being able to achieve that when we can put those time frames.
But I think from a rollout of the stock, that's the main thing.
Is that in terms of the availability of those vehicles in the future?
Well, I mean, from a light vehicle, they're available now. I'm not sure, I don't have the expertise in diesel heavy vehicles. Paul probably does, being the ex-president of the EV Society, but it is about the capacity we had. For example, if you had multiple cars on due for rollover in 1 year, I mean, how much more pressure does that put on the budget? Is that feasible? Is it practical to have a 2-year rollover or whatever? So you still get to your aim, but you might not achieve it by 225, not 227, for example. But you still get there, and you don't break the bank. Yeah, okay. Sorry, yes.
Just quickly, EVs, by 2024, they say they're going to be on parity because the price of the batteries are reducing each year. And in the document, you talk about residual value and depreciation. I think we're not depreciating electric cars too much. The batteries are actually lasting longer than they thought they would. So almost now the cars on parity getting is a whole lot of costs.
No, I completely understand that. But if you have, multiple, so how do you actually sensibly roll the stock over? You sort of got to plan that, but you still got that target of that's where we want to be. And, so that we don't roll all over 1 year, for example.
Yeah, but from practical,
As someone that oversees light fleet purchasing, and just want our policy is effectively 5 years turnover. 5 years is generally that's seen as the optimum time to replace. Within the 5 window, we've joined that nominally. The challenge will be the technology there to support of our utility, full drive vehicles. So they're still light vehicles, but needed for other export purposes, but effectively under any full 5 year window, we can turn them over.
So do we need all those four-wheel drive? Just put it out there.
For our fuel operations per se, they're not all full drive, but there are select vehicles within the fleet that are required for that.
Yeah. And I think that goes to the also, because people love their diesel cars, and the longevity of diesel and how, they're going to change the engine and all that, and all these problems. Apparently, I'm not a fan of diesel, but that goes to the heart of also bringing our staff along, so that there's an embracing of electric vehicles, rather than saying, well, we're actually going backwards, so bringing staff along as well that may think, maybe in a different space. Yeah.
Just underlining that point, we're at the City of Campbelltown again yesterday, and that was the discussion they were having, is that the staff sometimes are using vehicles outside of work hours for personal use as part of their package. And that was actually one of the concerns around EVs. They wanted to go from Campbelltown to Harbour on the weekends. How would that work? Whereas actually day to day in their work with council, there were no issues around the range. So they still highlighted bringing staff on their journey with moving forward.
Yeah.
Sorry, Tim, you've been through.
Just a couple of issues on electric vehicles. So there is a difference between the mock-ups and what the plan says. And the mock-ups at this stage are really just mock-ups to show how things will look. Yes, there's conceptual ideas on there. But I think on the electric vehicle side of things, we actually haven't finished working out all of the detail. We've done a life cycle assessment. We've got an agreed pathway to do the life cycle comparisons. We've got an idea for a trial, but it's actually for when the completion is going to be done, we're not entirely sure. Jack and I are attending a forum on electric vehicles at Campbelltown next month, I think, which will give us a little bit more information. The other thing I'd say is that what we use, the wording even in the mock-up says limited to electric vehicles, like fleet replacement limited to. It's not saying we'll have all vehicles changed by then. It's saying that we would be purchasing replacement electric vehicles by then. So I guess it's a bit of language in there that needs to be understood or tightened up. And I think there's a little bit of nuancing around that. We don't have the complete answers yet.
Yeah. I think it's really exciting having the whole like people will read this and interpret it in a particular way. So getting that language really clear and easy to understand goes back to Cody and Nathan's point about the messaging.
Having a look at time, we do have plenty of time left, but I feel like we're starting to move toward the natural completion here. And so we've done, thanks Julie, a recap on what was up there, identified whether there's any other issues to raise. Tim, you've got another one you want to come back on?
Sorry, I just wanted to come back to the advocacy and why it didn't stand out very much, because advocacy is a really key part of what we're doing. And Ian was right to pull out that it doesn't leak out of page. Karen was right to also identify that. And I'm just thinking aloud about what we could do to address that. We can certainly, there's two ways we can go. We can have our own section on what advocacy looks like rather than being part of community and engagement. We could also pull out some key advocacy ideas or priorities for the next year, and as the plan gets updated on an annual basis, they could be fleshed out a little bit more. And we could also talk about the submissions and the achievements that we've already made. Perhaps that will actually beef that up a bit
Thanks, and I know we capture that in the same leadership here as well. Now, perhaps we're in your hands here as to how long we want to, obviously we've got an opportunity to continue to go on. Do you want to continue to provide comments or? Sam, I think you were going to come in.
Given this time, I would like adding a few observations. Clearly, the thing that jumps out is that we represent town board operations, which represent 1% of our municipality's emissions. So we can do 100% effort and still only impact 1% of what comes out of our board of municipalities. So that talks exactly to the point of advocacy, because if we change 5% of our community, if they come along the journey with us, it's 5 times the outcome that we get on our own. So that's just, it's such a powerful thing, the community, and that's how we can bring them along to this journey. The other thing that I think probably is in the plan, but it's not dismissed as an action, is the tree canopy and the climate resilience of that. It's definitely mentioned, but it's not actually referenced as an action. And I think that aligns with some of the work that we're doing in sort of capturing our tree data and then transition towards a tree management plan. But another observation is an emission that's in the plan and not referenced as an action.
That can also, you can link into the other plans that have that detail and sort of cross-reference or hyperlink, but make it clear what you're talking about.
Councillor James?
Yeah, I think it's a very good point that Sam raised there, because the reason we're doing this is because we have, well, hopefully have the resources to be able to show what can be done and applicable to not only the residential ratepayers, but the commercial ratepayers. There's takeaways that we can provide that we're able to achieve that some people can take hold of and run with them. So that's why the messaging is very important. And councillors should always be a lead by example sort of process. So doing this is exactly that. And that's why, you know, street lights, you know, you might not necessarily be able to replace all the street lights because you don't own them in your own house, but you can turn around and say, well, what are LEDs worth these days? You might get some more interest around that. So yeah, I think although the 1% may be a worry for some, I don't look at it as a negative, I look at it as a positive. It really gives us the opportunity to show what we can do with our mere 1% can be achievable and can be adopted by the rest of the public. So yeah, hopefully we can get a bit more than 5%. But yeah, that's why our messaging is just paramount, because everything else sort of follows suit. We talked about budget restraints. It's a bit silly because we can't afford not to do these things we need to with the climate atmosphere we're in, but we also have our restraints. So we need to be able to tease that out, and the interest that comes along with it is what forces our budget to be spent on these things without community consultations and everything like that. So look, I think we're on the right track, and there's a lot of positives here. So yeah, like I say, it is on the positive.
Councillor Koch, and others.
Yeah, I just want to read out page 6. I think it's important that it says our planning framework under the Act through development, so we have to check through development implementation of these plans, so all those plans must assess financial sustainability, level of service delivery, provision of infrastructure, and demographic or development change. But this plan needs to work in with all the other ones. I think in there I did read that this was going to be the overarching plan. I don't think that's the case. I think it's one that influences all the others. We've got the community plan, which is the overarching one, and we've got the development plan, which includes everything else with the long-term financial plan as well. So for me, this plan is another one that they all influence each other, but it's not the overall overarching plan, which I think you actually talked about that. So I'm concerned if that's the language.
So we might just capture that Julian around a note on the other there, is where this is the overall hierarchy.
Yeah.
Councillor Davis? Oh, sorry. Ben.
So around the advocacy, I think, in particular areas, just the inter-council advocacy, I think there's a lot of, we have moved some motions, trying to get the LGA to declare a climate emergency. We just sort of keep doing it and then they're rejected and we put it back up. But the last time we got, I think we were one vote off. And, you know, and this is the kind of thing where, you know, some of those councils might, you know, never agree, but a whole chunk of those councils, you know, probably once you can get through this kind of messaging to them as well, I think we can make a big impact on this space, just by providing easy, like the fact that we're doing this plan and that we can make it something that other councils can use as a template, or just things like, you know, LED lighting and other things are examples of projects where it's a money saver, and that's something that is not, it's not always going to be the case with this kind of, sometimes we're going to have to spend money, not for the sake of making money, but for the sake of just having a, you know, something that's better for the environment. But we do have these projects that are saving money, and that's the kind of thing that other councils, you know, all agree, there's 100% agreement on budget savings being a good thing, across, you know, all councils, across all councils. And so I think, yeah, advocacy in terms of when we have something successful, sending it out, not just communities, but finding ways to, you know, promote that in other councils.
I'd like to make a brief observation around the motion that's gone to Local Government Association, the AGM, and just for your own feedback, they already be aware of it, but the amount of councils we go into where we're talking around climate change, and they refer to that discussion as being had. So whether they have or haven't declared a climate emergency, there's been a trickle-down effect for your action, which is actually stimulating the exact same discussion I think you want to. So it's worthwhile knowing that, you know, we put advocacy and leadership up on the board here, and you've achieved that, I think, really extensively across the state, just purely by continuing to push that motion there. Like I said, any other elected members, Tim, have got any other feedback? Great, we might go Tim, and I think we'll just get ready for a wrap.
Very keen.
Everyone take away the microphone. So.
I'm terribly sorry, but there was one thing that I just want to mention tonight, and that was, you know, the working with the Gawler youth as part of the Climate Emergency Action Plan working group. We had a discussion within the CA, and we had a bit of a started discussion last night with the Youth Advisory Council about what would it be if we did something completely different here, and we said that this Climate Emergency Action Plan was actually a partnership with the current generation, represented by council, with emerging and future generations, represented by the Gawler Youth Advisory Committee. And could it be done as something like a co-signed document or something that creates an intergenerational partnership there, and it would help add a light to the document and some accountability to the document. So it's just an idea. I don't think it's been done anywhere else. But given that the young people really pushed with the school strikes and everything else to get mitigation and the climate emergency on the global agenda, it would be something that's really acknowledging the work that they've done here in Gawler.
I can see lots of nodding heads around the table. Did anyone want to provide any comments on that? Yeah, Councillor Shanks.
Give it time, and now everyone's keen to stick around all that. Yeah, look, I love that idea, only because it gives ownership to the generation that is to inherit the decisions that we have made. So I do just sort of flag there, just listening to wanting to tie this plan back to our other plans and everything like that. We are opening ourselves up, but we just need to make sure that we're very, very clear on what that means and how that looks, because until I was on council, I didn't understand our planning structure. Now, that's just what it was. I didn't have time to understand how the decisions are made. So if we are going to turn around and we want to get the Youth Advisory Committee involved, which I reckon is fantastic on the first sign, I reckon we want to be able to do a lot more of these workshops but also bring the advisory in to really sort of nut out and make clear what this actually looks like. So yeah, I reckon that's a brilliant thing for sure. And of course, it can really happen.
So just as a nice segue, we've got the chair of the ACC here tonight, Renee. Renee, have you got any comments that you'd like to make on behalf of the ACC?
Probably just say that I support that idea, and hopefully it will be looked at in the next agenda as well, and we can get something else that would be really good again for us for us.
Thank you.
Yeah, probably a good idea. I just don't understand the practical terms what that means.
Okay, well, I'm going to have a stab at that. So if you've got co-signing, you have the mayor and you have the chair of the ACC co-signing the climate emergency plan. It's probably ceremonial, but as Nathan said, what you also can do is bring the ACC into a future workshop. I don't know if we need a future workshop around this, but if we do, what does that look like? You can't have the ACC around the council table as part of the council meeting, but you can certainly have a discussion where you collaborate. So because the plan will have to go out to public consultation, won't it? So as part of that consultation, for example, you have a workshop with the ACC. Council members have a workshop that we've probably got tonight, talking about, okay, have we got this right? Is there enough, what's your feedback as the ACC? But the plan you could have the plan as a co-signing document. That's part of your advocacy. So your advocacy is doing an event around that signing, for example, with the chair of the ACC and the mayor, current leader, youth leader. It's very powerful, as Tim says. When people see that, they actually go, well, wow, this one. And we did a lot of stuff around child friendly. It's diet well knows, and it feeds really nicely into that. And you have we're probably one of the few councils that actually have a really high functioning ACC. You look at Rossa, they don't have any ACC anymore. I don't know why, but they're taking a different direction. I think it's the wrong direction. I think having a structure that builds leadership, gets a voice, and the voice is so powerful that we've got ACC members on this seat working group. We've got Renee sitting here at a council workshop. We have ACC members bringing up motions on various matters, on advocacy matters. Renee's going to be having a meeting with the Children's Commissioner, because that's the sort of thing that the chair of the ACC does. And just think of those opportunities. So I think that there's limitations to practical limitations, but there's also opportunity for particularly around leadership and advocacy, and showing just as Mark said, the fact that we put up multiple motions to the LGA is making a difference, even though it may not have got up. People really stood up and listened. It is tricky each time we bring it up, but I think it is worth continuing to bring it up because councils, even if they don't declare an emergency, they're all starting to get into this space. They're all starting to realise, and none of them argued against climate change. All of them agreed. But the two things that stopped them was the LGA report for a start, and the notion that particularly with regional councils, you can't tell us what to do. Particularly around farmers, lots of farmers are on councils, and they get very paranoid about people telling them how to look after their farms, and I understand that. So, and the legalities, we did actually put up a really good argument around the legalities, particularly Salisbury stood up, lots of councils stood up, had different points of view, all supporting climate emergency. So there was no disagreement around the fact that there's climate change. That's not the argument. The argument is around whether you can afford it, what the risk is and the legalities. Some of those councils use that as a tool, and some of them think, well, it's not the LGA's remit. Well, it is the LGA's remit, and we do have to keep chipping away. And we will get there in the end, because I'll just give up.
Just getting back to the signing of the declaration.
Yeah.
I would just like to see the practicality of what that means. Because we signed RAP, for example, and that had implications, what we would do. So I just want to know what the implications would be, other than being involved.
Well, as you know, the chair of the RAP signed, also signed it, so it's no different.
I suppose there were obligations from that RAP that we should be implementing.
Well, that's why we've got to get the action plan, so it's achievable, as Henry said.
I'd just like to know what the implications are of this move. That's all I want to know. That's what the implications.
Are you meaning that
it's symbolic, or there's real outcomes?
I don't think there'd be any tangible legal requirement for the chair of the, is that what you mean?
No, I mean, at the moment, it sounds like a symbolic move, but I'd like to know what the implications of that would be. Because when we signed the RAP, there was implications that we were to do certain things, that's fine.
Yeah.
We do know, but I just want to know what the...
Well, it's not the signing, it's the council resolution that gives you that.
I know.
Yeah.
The more than symbolic, that's all.
I think the signing is symbolic, but it's also very powerful.
I just want to know.
I don't think there's any obligation when you sign a document that's actually a council resolution that gives it power.
Now, have an agreement, that's what you're saying, council agreement, I'd like to know, is more just symbolic, or is there other outcomes, tangible outcomes of doing that? I what's my name?
Well, I can talk to the CEO and governance about that. Why don't we do that? Would that help, Paul?
That would help.
I think we got there, sorry.
Councillor Griffin and then Deputy Mayor.
So Councillor Fraser and Deputy Mayor, or Deputy Mayor?
Sorry. Councillor Fraser, then Deputy Mayor was the order I had.
I actually think the thing with the app is really good. I think it's very powerful. It also shows the community that we're actually working with the next generation. We're not just setting our own mindset, but we've got, we are thinking about what we're going to do for time, and I think it would be very powerful.
I think that's important.
Probably to Mark or Julian or Jim or Jack, nothing's been really said about, we're sort of tracking on our own at the moment in what we're doing as a local council, and that's been discussed with Jack as well. But Gawler hangs its hat on being such a professional town for the education system. I mean, we've got the largest school of its size in Trinity campus in the Southern Hemisphere, plus all the other schools. To me, we can be educated and we can be out there convincing our community to come with us and be on this journey. What involvement do you believe this council should do to be involved or bring on board the school cricket? Or is it too large to think about?
I'm happy to share an opinion, and I think what we've discussed tonight, and Sam, you highlighted this earlier on, is that the community missions is where most of the action is at and the biggest opportunities. And so when you're talking around the community, to my mind, you can always segment your community or a target audience, and one of the big ones is going to be young people in schools. So I thought there's an opportunity in actions to look at other actions that align with what's happening in schools.
Because I mean, we've got some very passionate principals and that in the town, starting from the juniors and all that sort of thing. And to me, I haven't sort of heard anything about the point where, it started at a young age, then that's something that happened. I mean, my people tell me things that I'm never used. And the grandkids, what they're teaching at school. So where do we move
David, you just want to come in? Do you want a microphone?
Yeah, so there is an action on page 43, which is engage and collaborate with local schools, including those participating in the Climate Clever program, to assist students and families, so not just the students when they're in schools, but also connecting with their families in understanding and planning for climate change in households. So that specifies one particular program, and obviously if we had some other program coming up in between times that we thought was better. Why the Climate Clever one was identified as it was a early runner. Also, there was state government support for schools that wanted to participate in it as well, so it makes it a lot cheaper. So yeah, it is something that's been identified. The other thing I'd say, just in relation to the comment about the YAC involvement, while clearly nothing's set in stone, but the nature of the discussions that we've been having at the CIP so far have been along the lines of very deeply engaging with YAC in the development of the plan, so that they have a really deep input into the plan through the CIP process, and that there's a symbolic kind of acknowledgement of the impact of the benefits of the CIP. So that's kind of where we've been thinking, is it's their input into the plan to make sure that it's satisfactory for them as a future generation. And then, there's a lot of symbolism and actions and engagement processes and partnerships that I'm sure will spin out of that. But, this might change perhaps, but that might be reflected as we go along and kind of fine tune the later drafts of the plan, but that's where we're at the moment.
We are just about time up, so I think it's probably time for Julie and I to hand it back over to there. Reverend, I don't know if you have any final comments you'd like to make to round things out tonight.
Well, thank you, Mark and Julie. Thank you, Tim and Jack and Catherine and Renee, Sam. I don't think Ryan said much, but he's there too, and Henry. And elected members. I think it was quite a robust discussion. I think there was some really good feedback, very positive feedback. I think there's generally, my hearing of the feedback is there's sort of in principle support for what's in the document. It can be fine-tuned within various elements, but I think that it's on the right track, as Nathan said. So I think it's a fabulous journey that we're on. I'm really excited about the advocacy and the leadership that was shown both in youth but also around the table. So I look forward to the updated document, refined document, and I guess we'll go from there and we'll get that further information from you, Councillor Koch, around governance and just what that looks like with the Act. We can get governance onto that, Henry. And maybe you guys, Tim, you come up with the ideas, you might get a framework, no pressure. He's already got it worked out. But I think we'll wrap it up. Thanks everyone. Call it a night. Look forward to the next discussion on the climate.